Hello and welcome to Comic Book Herald Interviews. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. Today, I'm welcoming writer Victor LaValle. We're excited to be talking today about Sabretooth, the X-Men line of comics, Sabretooth and the Exiles, which is the first issue came out this week as of the recording. Of course, we'll touch on Eve, Destroyer, novels like Devil in Silver and The Changeling, and a fantastic writing career. Victor, you are officially the first return guest I've had on CBH interviews. You were the 22nd interview way back in 2020, and we got to talk about Destroyer in detail. And now you're back for Sabretooth. I've steadfastly avoided having return guests, but for Sabretooth and for the work, I was like, we got to do
it. In honor of Sabretooth, I suppose. But it is funny to think. I was thinking about that when we'd spoken then, and number one, that I appreciated that you were interested then when it was this independent comic and I wasn't doing comics in any real way. So that was like at that time I had appreciated very much the interest, and like and all that. And so when you said like, can we get back together? I was like, yes, absolutely. It was a great conversation before. I enjoyed the channel a lot. And then also it felt fun to think about, even like, back then it was like Destroyer, and then thinking about, like the beauty of things growing and changing.
Yeah, no, I went back and I listened to like the first 15 minutes, which is, again, like I said, like I haven't done return guests, so I haven't really had the chance to do that. And it was funny because one, just changes, obviously, right? Like it's been 2 years, I've done a lot of these. But then the other thing was I was asking you a lot of questions that were like, so you're a novelist and now you're writing a comic. And it was whereas now it's like you're doing tons of comics. You got lots going on.
Yeah. But yeah, and there's also was a feeling like, so you're from the moon. How is it being on Mars?
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, it's good to see you doing both. So, all right, so let's dig into Sabretooth a little bit, because this is one of my favorite comics of 2022. For folks who haven't read it, we'll include it in the show notes, but certainly, I think if you follow a lot of the stuff I do on CBH, obviously I talk X-Men a lot, and it's not only one of my favorite X-Men books, it's one of my favorite Marvel books, just straight up one of my favorite comic books of the year. So I loved it, I'm promoting it to everyone, and I'm super excited to see it back with the Exiles, in the continuation of these minis. Let's start here. What's your role and involvement with the X Office, right? They've got this whole big Krakoa experiment. There's a real community aspect to it that's been pushed. You're brought in to do these series of minis. Kind of how do you get connected with everyone, and how like connected are you in terms of the interconnected storytelling that they're doing?
Right. Well, so I came in thanks to my buddy Ben Percy. He just kind of reached out one day, obviously he's doing both Wolverine and X-Force. And he'd reached out mostly just saying like, hey, so I guess this must have been 2 years ago, really, saying, hey, if you've been reading the latest round of Hoxpox stuff, and I had been already, I was already a fan. He said, do you ever have any pitches? If you ever have anything, let me know. I can put you in touch with Jordan and Jonathan and go from there. And the only pitch I had was for Sabretooth. That was the only character I thought I would want to write, or the only one I had an idea about that felt like very formed almost right away. And that it was tied to prison, questions about prison, and also about, I really actually leaned into and liked that it was the worst human being on earth. And how could you tell a story about that person without doing but really deep down he's nice kind of thing? I really didn't want to do that. And so he said, okay, I'll put you in touch. I had a meeting with Jonathan and Jordan, and I gave them my very broad outline of what might happen, and then they had some nice back and forth. I'd had an idea for like 1 or 2 extra mutants down there, and then they said, how about a couple more, so you have room for story to grow and all the rest. And that was exciting. And then they said, well, why don't we do this first mini? Like really, essentially, why don't we just get Sabretooth out of the pit? And then we'll see if people like it or not. And then even as we were moving through it, they were liking it. It was kind of a nice vote of confidence. They were liking it enough that they said, well, let's let's plan for, unless it's, I guess, a total bomb, what would happen once they're out,
Yeah.
and where would it go? And that was kind of the path of it. As far as my role, so in the, like, when I first joined in, I would say for the first, I don't know what it must have been, 3 to 6 months, I was on the meetings every 2 weeks. The Slack, the group meets, and then we have a Slack, and everybody's constantly in communication there. And so I was a part of those meetings every 2 weeks. I was on the Slack, we were communicating. And for me, the best part of that was, like, I got to see the real big plans of, like, for lack of better terms, like the heavy hitters, the people doing the regular runs, so like Jonathan, Vita, Al, Jerry, Leah was doing X Factor at that point, and that was a regular. And then Kieran he was just starting the same time as me, but it was clear he was also going to be writing a big story, Zeb was on his way out, so I was just catching the tail end of Hellions. And Teeny was there, of course, obviously doing the Excalibur thing. So the fun for me was seeing what everyone was doing, and then in a way, the blessing I got was that I didn't actually have to sort of weave into those big stories, because they were really intricate, and that planning was going on long before I showed up,
Yeah.
And so I couldn't show up and be like, hey, how about if Sabretooth just beheads Scott Summers? And then, I couldn't just throw all that in. But in a way, that was actually a gift, because being in the pit, being sort of separated from everyone else, actually allowed me a ton of freedom. So, like, really, in the end, the only way I really sort of got woven in was that I tried to make sure that you could see the ways that my comic was catching up to the real events when we would pop up. But I had quite a bit of, like, leeway.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that.
For sure. No, and it is, I mean, so consistently, it seems like a lot of the big two stuff, when there is that freedom to sort of roam, it winds up producing a lot of the best material. You see this throughout the history of both Marvel and DC. I did enjoy, too, like, it was kind of nice, because we've gotten just so much has happened in the world, and it just, time feels like, so compressed, but then simultaneously, like, it's been a million years. Getting to kind of go back in this is right after Hoxpox moment, and then kind of progress through what has happened timeline wise was kind of a nice, like, refresher. And honestly, like, because the Sabretooth beat was so big, and it's how the series ends effectively,
right?
Is with this, like, absurdly torturous sentencing that Sabretooth is given, where it's clearly like, okay, that's a lingering thread that's coming back. Like, you don't do something like that and just not address it. It was cool to go back and be like, all right, we're getting it. Here's the moment. And then, I think the book lives up to it, which is exciting. So you mentioned there's a couple things there just in the pitch stage that I want to address. You mentioned, and I think you talked about in an interview that, like, initially your pitch was like, we're going to have one additional person sent to the pit, because that's the big, and, like, spoilers for Sabretooth, certainly, like, if you haven't read it, I recommend you do so, and then come on back and check this out. You mentioned initially that, like, all right, the big twist at the end of issue 1 is these 5 additional exiles show up, right? They're exiled to the pit, and that's kind of a surprise, because we don't know really who's been sent at that point. And you were like, it was going to just be Melter.
Yes.
Why?
Yes.
Why Melter? Why was that the first pick?
Well, so the original way I was going to take it was almost, because Melter in his previous runs is on the, like, knife edge between hero and villain. Like, he wants to be a hero, but he keeps doing villainous things. And so I'd thought of it along the lines of, like, well, what if you just watch Sabretooth, like, turn him, and that Melter's power, as much as he's kind of treated like a joke, I think is actually a profoundly powerful power, right? Like, he can literally melt anything.
Mm-hmm.
He kills people left and right. Like, so my thinking was, it was like, I don't know if you at all have ever read a novella by Stephen King called Apt Pupil.
No.
And it's a wonderful novella. Spoilers, but it's basically about a retired, like a Nazi who escaped Germany. There's a teenage boy in the neighborhood who's really sort of like interested in this like reclusive, weird old man. They start to form a bond, and you think like the horror is this man used to be a Nazi, and now he's hiding out among us. But then what actually becomes the horror is he starts telling stories to the kid about what they did, and the kid likes it. And the kid is interested in it. And then by the end of the novella, the Nazi has essentially turned this kid into a living weapon. And then he goes and does his thing, right? And so it was a kind of an apt pupil kind of thing, where it was going to be like, obviously Melter wouldn't deserve whatever he got, right? Probably.
Yeah.
But his time in the pit, Sabretooth would have turned him. And then when he returns to the surface, he's Sabretooth's great weapon. And then, like, in that path, it would have been the daydream would be like he melts the entire Quiet Council or something like that as like a last act of whatever, and throws everything in disarray, blah, 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 right?
Yeah,
but since I'm not in charge of the X office, I can't melt the entire Quiet Council.
Yeah.
Right? And so, and more importantly, that's one story over 5 issues. Even if you went that way, you can't fill 5 issues with that. You know, it's just not enough, right? Like, you go, oh, is he bad yet? Is he not bad yet? But, you know, like that. So as we were talking, they were saying, like, well, what if you expanded it? What if you had, like, a broader swath of mutants? And then I was like, well, then I could play with this idea of temptation, Sabretooth as Satan. Mm-hmm. Can he turn people, blah, blah, blah. And then they said, okay. And they said, who would you like to use? And then I was like, oh, here's some people that no one uses.
Yeah.
You know, and then one guy I'd like to make up. It was originally going to be 2, but then it started to get, like, I was going to create 2 characters, but it started to get a little too unwieldy. So I'd like to save her. Someday I would love to introduce this other mutant if I can. But then once I had 5 mutants, I realized it's not as simple as just Sabretooth and one person temptation. It starts to become about all these people dealing with, like, surviving Sabretooth, but also surviving the quote-unquote justice system of Krakoa.
Right.
And it became, to my mind, like a more interesting book than the original, you know, just Melter as a weapon. And also, I have to be honest, like, the hard part too is, would readers stick around to see if Melter was turned?
Right. I
really don't know. You know, I had my doubt. With hindsight, I feel pretty sure they wouldn't. You know, it'd be like, well, that was interesting, I guess, but you know, it would be different if it was like Nightcrawler. Could you turn Nightcrawler? Then you say, oh, that could be fun. You know,
right.
But Chris Coates.
Then you got the whole God versus the devil religious elements
Yes.
certainly get heightened in that scenario.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
But
interesting.
then you also bring in people's like deeper, you know, like if I did find a way to turn Kurt evil, I just can't imagine how many feelings would be hurt.
Right.
You know?
As a huge Nightcrawler fan, I'm already like a little on edge. I'm already a little
yes,
nervous.
exactly. Like, Nightcrawler Kurt would never do that.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. And you'd be
Right.
like, all right, I know.
Yeah. Well, it is. I mean, that is the fun thing about everyone you pick here with the Exiles, right? Necra, Oya. You have a huge role for Mole, certainly, right, in this book. You know, but it's all the, and then, you know, Third Eye, right, is a new character creation who's super interesting, right? It's all these players. I guess Madison Jeffries, like, has had a role over the past decade, but he's an oddball, you know?
Yes.
And it's all these players where it's like, yeah, you can like do whatever you want with them, I think, in terms of fandom. I'm sure editorially there's more freedom. But then also it's like, you know, something like Necra in particular, like this is a character in dire need of change and rehabilitation. Yeah, right? Like that is a rough, even for like some stories are out of touch and you can tell they're they're the well-intentioned out of touchness, but Necra is one of those where it's like somebody should have been in the room to say,
just what were you thinking?
This is a bad idea. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's cool to see that character, and it's like in Exiles, like the relationship that was built between Necra and Oya now, to the point where they're talking about influences and reading. It's cool to see that develop and be like, oh, this is a real person now. This is a character.
Yeah.
You know,
I can't tell you, like, I have felt incredibly happy for the positive reception for the previous mini and for this one, and various characters and all the rest. But I have so loved writing Necra and Oya, and that was definitely not my original intent. Like, I wasn't thinking ahead, like the two of them will become these revolutionary sisters and blah 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 blah. But it just started to build that way, and the more it built, the more fun I was having with them, and then I think in Oya's case, while she isn't used as much as she could be, I think almost universally she's loved.
Yeah.
Right? Like, everybody loves her. So it felt like, okay, she doesn't need rehabilitation. She just needs more panel time, right? Just to see her out in the world more. But Necra, I felt like, number one, there's the horrible origin story. And then number two, that even when she's been used in not every case, but in many cases in the past, it's as this sort of bombshell weirdo acolyte of like Grim Reaper and all, like Mandrill. It's or Mandrake. Is it Mandrill or Mandrake? Mandrill.
Mandrill.
Mandrake is the magician.
Yeah.
Yeah. That even there, like, what also offended me was, like, you gave her this awful story and she can't even be the lead in her own stories.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
And so I was into that, and then if I'm also honest, I felt like the other thing that was almost never done with her was, like, she was never written as a black character, right? She was, the fact that she was albino or whatever, it was treated like she's just, I don't know, maybe they just called her like a crazy witch or something like that.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And I felt like that was another way that I said, like, I know for sure the spectrum of blackness is quite broad, and that Oya, Third Eye, and Necra are all black characters, and then you throw in Bling and all that. And I said, I'm just throwing them all in. And again, as you say, like, because none of them is a top tier or even mid tier character, I did have a ton of freedom to remake them in any way I really kind of wanted. And yeah, I feel really happy with Necra and Oya as, like, I always think of it as like an auntie and a niece who are always, the auntie is tough, the niece is sweet, and they balance each other out in this beautiful way.
Yeah. I mean, I think Oya was probably, like, so you see these characters show up in the pit, and the first thought is like, well, what did they do? And you talk about this, right? Like, that's a human reaction to, like, you see someone go into prison, right? And it's like, oh, what did they do to justify, that sentencing? And Oya, I think, was for sure, for readers who are familiar with that character and have seen her, like, as the sweetest kid who, like, befriends Brew, in Wolverine and the X-Men and stuff, like, and, like, is, like, without prejudice. It was like, oh, that's what? Like, what could she have done? And then increasingly, as you see sort of like, oh, like, she's really close with Necra, it was kind of like, oh, well, like, she's under her wing. I can see it going that direction more. But that's been a really fun relationship that I'm super invested in now. And it is, you're tapping into it in Exiles, this first issue here. There's a meta commentary going on that is, I think, super, like, just like comic fans just kind of intuitively understand this, which is you have your heroes of the day and you have their story, especially in X-Men comics. This is all the mutants that we don't talk about, right? This is all the mutants. And I think it's one of the most untapped, underserved things in the Krakoa era, which I think a lot of readers are playing with, but, like, this book is so centrally fixated on it, which is, okay, but what about everyone else? What about everyone else who's living in this world and society? And then Mole kind of becomes our Claremont era Kitty Pryde, right? In terms of, like, this is our POV. This is just the average Joe who can't get an audience with the Quiet Council, right? And what happens to them. One question. How close did you come to putting Changeling in the pit just for the branding of it?
I didn't. I didn't give into that temptation.
Okay. Still a possibility, shapeshifter.
But
so
still,
like,
you never know.
yeah.
You never know. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, I do want to like sort of underscore your point. Like, I'm one of the other lucky things about the Sabretooth being in this Sabretooth mini is like, unlike the folks who are writing the main brand titles, there's a freedom to also being able to be the sort of the one on the side who's criticizing, right? Who gets to point out the flaws,
Yeah.
and who doesn't have to also, like, I don't have to tell the stories of the main brand characters, and I don't have to carry the burden of what heroic means, you know, where every choice is potentially sort of put under a microscope,
Right.
so that even like just understandable human choices suddenly become like, so and so would never do that, or so and so would never do that, you know. And so I, you know, in many ways, I feel like I have a much easier job than the folks who are carrying the big titles, you know. And I like this. I like this. This, like, there's a thing in. I remember it was in. What was the zombie movie with World War Z with Brad Pitt, right? Maybe it was in the book as well. I don't remember the book quite as well, but there's a little part where when he visits Israel, there's a guy he's with who says, like, they say, how did you figure out the zombie issue, blah, blah, blah. And he says, we have a way of running our office or our government, whatever, which is like, if there's 10 men in the room and 9 agree, one person has to be the person to suggest the impossible, or to poke holes, and that's his job, is the one who pokes holes. And the idea is like, and in that World War Z movie world, that's the person who said, I know it's impossible, but what if it's zombies? And that they got the leg up on the zombie plague because of that. And I really feel like my role in some ways is that hole poker.
Yeah.
You know, and I get to say, like, well, what about the visible mutants? How come they don't get anything? What is the Morlocks' life like when Storm and the others aren't there? They have lives, don't they? They have their own stories, don't they? And I like that. I like being in that place.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think like heading into Sabretooth, it was clear that the character situation offered, you know, a glaring opportunity to investigate incarceration,
Yes.
and how and why systems dole out punishments. I won't pretend to have had the clarity on how those questions could be served, but like I knew it
Right.
felt wrong. You know, it felt
Yes.
like this is horrible. Like Professor X is, and it's one of those things where you've done this balance very nicely where Sabretooth is horrible too.
Yes.
And we do not,
right.
there was a moment, I forget, it's like the second or third issue, where you kind of get into some of Sabretooth's psychology and some of his history. And there's a moment where it's like, oh, are we leaning empathy? Are we leaning reformation? And you take it back, and you're like, no, no, this character has still done.
He's terrible.
He's the worst. He's absolutely
He's the worst.
and it's okay to think that, and that's what we're going to keep
Yes.
thinking. But at the
Yes.
same time, the punishment was unjust, right?
Yes.
Because especially too is like the way you do the pit, the way you kind of imagine it. Sabretooth has sort of agency. His will sort of overtakes this Krakoan pit, which is a total mystery to us until this book, and he kind of gets to live out like fantasies. And it almost sounds like,
Yes.
oh, like, well, if you get to live in this infinite jest dream world, like maybe that's not so bad. But that wasn't the pitch even. The pitch was you're going to be immobile, unable to do anything, and aware of it forever. That is torture. So anyway, big picture, like you have a chance to look at that, look at what's wrong with it, look at the Quiet Council and poke holes, like you're saying.
Yeah.
What was most important to you in exploring the facet of, like, you know, we're building a society and penal systems are going to be a part of it, but then we have Professor X saying, well, we'll have no prisons. But here's a prison anyway. Like, how did you, like, what was most important to you to try to communicate there?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me was that it is, one of the biggest things was, it was to say basically like, you can't claim a set of ideals and live a different set of ideals, right? Like that's, and then on, you know, obviously maybe in ways that are incredibly obvious. I'm speaking about, since I'm an American, I'm speaking about the U.S. and our, the age-old thing. We are the nation of independence and freedom and personal independence and all the rest. And then you say, but if you do go to prison, you will become slave labor, and private prisons and public prisons will profit from your labor. You will make 3 cents a day, and they will sell what you make for $5. And who keeps that money? The state doesn't even keep that money. It goes to some private entity who runs that prison. And you say, like, so what is the part about freedom and about fairness under law and all that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
And so it felt very natural for me to say, like, I know all the ways, like at the beginning of Hoxpox or during Hoxpox, it felt to me like I love, I mean, I'm hardly saying anything new, is a revolutionary sort of run, right? Like, and a great way. I really appreciated the way it forced us out of the old, like, mutants are always the hunted and all the rest. Now it's sort of like, okay, now you have power. Now you have an nation. What are you going to do with it? But of course, like, the hard part about anything is, like, then what they did with it, at least in this instance, if not any others, that moment when Professor X threw him in the pit, like, if he had just even said, you will be kept in the pit, we will basically shut down your brainstem, you will be in a coma forever, I wouldn't have a story. I wouldn't have written it. I wouldn't have pitched it, because it would have sort of been like, okay, I mean, that's not good, but I guess whatever, But when it was specifically like, you'll be down there and you will be aware and you will never be able to be free, I was like, oh, you mean to torture him.
Right.
That's the whole point, right? And that, and by comparison, it's like, I mean, when you read stories about people in solitary confinement for 20 years, right? In solitary. Now I'm talking about in prison. I'm talking about in solitary, in prison for 20 or more years. Occasionally those men make it out, and their stories are fascinating, but those people have been tortured for 20 years, right? Because solitary confinement is a form of torture. It's not a penalty. Like, nobody did anything where you say, okay, for 20 years you have to sit alone. Mm-hmm. I mean, me and my wife, our kids, we would do timeouts.
Yeah, sure.
You know what I mean? But that's 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And 5 minutes to a kid is an eternity.
Yeah.
So 20 years, that is a state saying, I'm going to punish you. And then when you read into who they put into that kind of solitary, it's so often people who were pushing for, like, prison reform, people who were standing up against corrupt systems. It's never like somebody like, oh, they stabbed 2 people.
Yeah, right.
For 20 years. Never. It's always people who had a revolutionary underpinning to whatever they did, along with being criminals. I'm not setting aside the crime part, but that kind of time is that.
It's making a point, right? It's like,
making a point.
You're
right.
making a message here. Like, if you do this, right, here's the torture that awaits.
And we are also separating you from a population who you might turn into revolutionaries, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're starting to show that, we put you in here. Now, most of these kids who come in who don't necessarily have this awareness or this knowledge, if you're there and you're talking to them every day, I mean, Autobiography of Malcolm X is a perfect example, right? Like, he came in a crook, a thug, a hustler, all the rest. And he left one of the great revolutionary leaders of the 20th century because another prisoner started talking to him. An older prisoner with awareness started talking to him. And nothing scares an institution or a system more than the idea. I don't know if you watched Andor on
it's
Disney.
so shockingly good.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's telling a very similar story,
It's a surprising companion piece in a way.
Yes.
That when I started it, I did not anticipate. Yeah.
It's been glorious. I mean, I have to say, like, I mean, obviously people have different things they love or whatever, but for me, it's like the best Star Wars thing in a decade. And I've loved lots of Star Wars stuff. I love The Mandalorian. I love this and that thing, but and I admit, not a thorough Star Wars reader, viewer, or whatever. But for me, I was just like, oh, here's my cup of tea. Thank you very much.
Right.
Tony Gilroy.
Yeah, no, it certainly has the most to say.
Yes.
Whereas, something like Mandalorian, which I enjoy greatly, is a bit more like, hey, remember Boba Fett? That armor was cool.
Yes.
What if we did that again?
Yes. And that's beautiful too.
And it's fun.
They're doing
Yeah.
different things, but this thing, every episode, I'm like, oh, they did it. They went to it. They talked
know.
about it, and they're telling a story with ramping drama. It's not just people lecturing anybody.
Right.
You know.
No, it's cool stuff. So with the Pit and sort of this commentary on prison and the injustice, it is fascinating because in retrospect, it's like if the Quiet Council had just like executed Sabretooth, like that wouldn't have been good. Like I'm
Right.
generally opposed, but it would have created far fewer problems.
Absolutely.
And like you said, like there's probably not a lot. Like I don't know. Then the story is like maybe somehow word sneaks out, and now there's like a martyrdom or something, and
Yeah.
it becomes sort of a philosophical. I think you described it as like a philosophical virus, but it's like now Sabretooth is around, and he gets to create that.
Yes.
He gets to set the stage for rebellion without doing anything, which is his bread and butter, which is violence, which I think is kind of fascinating. Like because the thing he says when he goes in the pit is like, "I'm going to kill you, Professor X. I'm going to kill your whole line." And
Yes.
in the moment, I hear that as well. That's typical Sabretooth, right? That's what he does.
Right.
He violently attacks everything. But the way he actually strikes, and I think he's kind of underrated as a schemer in some ways
Yes,
throughout Marvel
I
history.
agree.
Yeah, is like the way he strikes is like, I'm just gonna infect everyone with the truth of
Yes.
what happened here and what the pit is, and that is going to damage Professor X's reputation. You know, it's funny, Professor X is this character with such an outsized presence. As readers, I think, and certainly as readers who are deeply familiar with X-Men, we often take for granted that we know Professor X is a jerk. like we all know that, right? We
Yes.
immortalize the Kitty Pryde Professor Xavier as a jerk. The nation of Krakoa holds him up as a savior, right? The nation
Yes.
of Krakoa is the god figure that just
That's
next to
right.
Magneto. He's due for a fall.
Yes.
I think it's coming. I don't want you to spoil anything, but like,
Yeah.
is that part of what you're getting at here with Sabretooth is like, this guy has to come down. And how do you think Sabretooth kind of plays a role in that?
Well, I certainly think I read when I was reading it the first time Sabretooth's threat as exactly that, as bluff and bluster, because he's not going to kill Legion, right?
Right.
So what else is he going to do? And so then when I pitched it and I was going back and I was looking at it, I realized like, as you say, to the point about Sabretooth, like he is essentially just he's a superpowered CIA operative, right? And the CIA has a very long history of toppling governments in other countries. Iran, Central and South America, like we do it. The CIA does that,
Yeah.
right?
Well, you've got in here like the Congress for Cultural Freedoms, just some of
Yes.
those, the way like jazz music and just popping music, like that was stuff that was new to me, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Right, exactly. And
Yeah.
so, and we do, and it does it in lots of different ways, right? And so then I started thinking like, well, essentially Sabretooth would be like a high level CIA op. He would know that you can destroy a nation with a forward battle if you have that kind of power, but if you don't, you can find a way, you can sneak in and destroy a nation.
Yeah.
Right. And so then I realized like, okay, what I want to set up is how Sabretooth, that's not his plan initially, but once those 5 other mutants come down, and once he starts to see that this weird thing is happening where, like, so one of the things that kind of came up sometime is like, what was Doug's plan? Like what was he planning or doing? And for me, the idea was that Doug and Krakoa were kind, right? By giving him this ability to sort of live in his mind and all the rest. But the problem is sometimes kindness gets you killed, right? And so Doug meant well. He thought, we're doing a kindness to you because Professor X and the Quiet Council were too harsh. But a dude like Sabretooth doesn't just say, thanks very much, I appreciate the little bit you gave me. He says, oh, you opened that door this much? Let me crack it wide open, right? That's just what he does. And so Sabretooth essentially pushes things much farther than Doug or Krakoa could have ever imagined, was my feeling, right? And it's not that they're stupid, it's just that they're good, right? And they can't imagine a sort of conniving intelligence the level of Sabretooth.
Right.
That you just, and against a person like that, it's like, that Dahmer series that recently happened, on top of
Yeah.
all the systematic racism and all the rest, there's also a way that I think for many people, it's also the idea, you're telling me he's cannibalizing people and eating them in his home? Come on, that doesn't happen, right? Like you just can't fathom it. And then you add in insult to injury that like, then the neighbor's trying to tell you it's happening, and you have all these like cops and all these kinds of people like, it's just not true. He's cooking stinky food because they won't hear it. And so that was my feeling with that. And so I guess in a way, the way I would put it forth is like, I certainly feel I am laying at least I'm chipping away in my little way at some of the latest foundation for Professor X.
Yeah.
Right? Certainly Sabretooth could never, in a one-on-one way, take down Xavier. So my hope is that it will look like a little bit longer term plan, and as Exiles moves forward, you'll see the ways that perhaps his influence might spread even more, and that maybe that will culminate in something that sort of forces the hand of Krakoa, in a sense, to deal with it, and then maybe by dealing with it, Krakoa will even still make it only worse.
Right. Sure. No,
That's
that makes
my
sense.
thinking.
It is funny to hear you describe sort of the Doug role in this story, because I actually kind of, that was one I hadn't really interrogated, pun intended, because like so far I feel like there's an appetite right now, especially amongst the House of X and Powers faithful, where it's like they really want Doug to have a secret plan, right? Like the big Inferno drop in Hickman's final book is Doug and Krakoa and Warlock are like the third player in all this, right? They know everything, and they're kind of like actually kind of dictating what happens. But then the irony of it is, every time Doug gets a chance to do something with Sabretooth, with Moira in the end of Inferno, he does the kind thing. Like that's kind of who this character is, and it generally does not benefit him. It doesn't. People are like, what was the thinking? Like, what was the scheme? And it's like, I think he was just trying to be nice. That's what he does.
I think the other thing is like X-Men comics in particular, but maybe superhero comics as a whole, are kind of predicated, in a weird way, I would say, are predicated on the idea that pure goodness isn't real, right? Like people, but X-Men in particular, that universe, people are always scheming. There's always a secret plan. There's always a this and this, right? Which I love, right? Yeah. It's soap opera, right? But so I do think the thing that kind of maybe sometimes flummoxes people the most is that there's just a genuinely good person who sometimes is punished for their goodness, right? Like, and punished not in a huge way, but just in a sort of way like, to my mind, like at the end of the first mini, my thinking was like, it's just so heartbreaking for Doug and Krakoa. And that like the seed that he gives to Necra is a, I guess I don't want to say too much, but is like a thing it's a thing for, that's meant to deal with Sabretooth in a certain way that I don't want to reveal yet.
Yeah, right.
But it's also maybe, for lack of a better term, as close as Doug might come to revenge.
I mean, it is. If I remember correctly, it took the form of like a skull.
It's a little skull. Yes.
Which is dark for Doug.
And yes, and it's there's a real plant that has those. That's what their seeds look like. Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I definitely based it on a real plant, but that just looked so cool,
Right.
But I felt like it would also be, because Doug had essentially been played by Sabretooth, him saying like, plant this when you reach him, plant this in the soil when you reach it, when you find him. And then, we get to see, does Doug have a ugly side?
Yeah.
Or just even like, or for a person like Doug, what would revenge or justice look like? You know what I mean? It wouldn't look like it does for like I don't know, Wolverine or Professor X or Magneto, it's
Right.
still going to be. The one thing I can say is I think it's in its own way, it's still a very Doug plan.
Okay, I'm excited to see this develop. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I had forgotten he gave Necra that seed until I reread it
Right.
for this interview, and then I was like, oh, okay, that's coming, right? Like that's
Right.
something we've planted. Okay, one thing I've enjoyed here in Sabretooth and in Exiles is like how naturally your writing style gravitates toward the use of data pages. These interstitial informational blocks where you get to weave in elements of American history. That's something that struck me about like Devil and Silver, for example, where there's like a substantial break to explore the life of Vincent van Gogh. Like there's like a big chunk, right? It's like history of Van Gogh
Yes.
stuff. One of the exciting things about House and Powers is there's this feeling that these pages can be anything. And I think it has opened up expectations for certainly Marvel Comics. How interesting did you find that as an opportunity taken on this gig? And like how interested are you in exploring sort of the potential of those pages? Because there's that like they can be anything. They can be whatever you want.
Yes. Well, so the big thing, so the first instinct with the data pages, when I was coming with the first mini, was to just treat it like a chance to write some prose, right? And maybe I would say you would go, here's the backstory, here's Necra's. Here's how she tells the story of her life, or here's Oya and the recurring nightmare she has about when she burned up her village, or whatever, like that kind of thing, which it would be fine, right? But I felt like, but they can read the comics for all that, the comics exist. And then you could do something closer to like what Hickman does with those, where they are really much more like graphic design pages, and they're really pretty beautiful to see. And then also you get to see my favorite versions of his data pages are the ones where he'll cover 2,000 years in just, then this happened, then the Nimrod faction started a family, and then and you just, and the fun of it is you have room to, you can, when it works at its best, you fill in all this story that you couldn't have in the comic, right?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like the Hemingway like forward story, but like the comics version of it, where it's
the
like
comics version.
The Nimrod faction started a family. That's only 5 words, but it's an incredible story that I want to know everything about.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I like it also because it even like I think there's easily one like here's the story of what happened when the Brood became what's his name's came under the
Brew.
I can't. I'm blanking on. Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah.
When he ate the egg.
Yes, Brew. Yeah.
Brew, and he ate the egg, and he took over he took them over, and then that was just kind of a side thing, like a data page later.
Yeah.
Right. Like they mentioned it just quickly, and I could easily see a 12-issue mini.
Right.
That was just all about the havoc that came from that decision.
Sure.
And at least for me, I really enjoy that kind of thing as well. But in the case of I guess I would say in the case of my data pages, what I also realized was because I'm not writing a mainline title, I also don't have that leeway, right? I can't say so and so. I can't say these are the years when Wolverine and Storm became a couple and they traveled the galaxy, and he was her right-hand man,
right,
doing murders on her behalf. Blah blah blah. I can't say that because they're gonna say like, well, we're not writing that, and kind of thing. So that's when I kind of said like, well, what could maybe I could use these pages for this historical stuff.
Right.
And that I always love, I just always love learning about the wildness of history, and feeling like comics to my mind, sometimes in a strange way, divorces itself from real life, from real history, to the detriment of the reader, I would say. I know Alan Moore gets a ton of crap for his more recent years, decades of crapping on. I don't want to mess up
Oh, we're far enough
cursing
in.
too much or whatever. Okay, okay. Of crapping on, like I remember he got in trouble a little while back because he said something about like people who read Batman are people who love fascists or something like that.
Yeah, right.
Right.
The whole superhero tradition to him is
Yes.
the beginnings of fascist propaganda. I
Right.
think, yeah.
But I feel like if you read Watchmen, I don't see how you could disagree with him.
Right.
Right. And the point I felt like, number one, he knows how to give good copy. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people will pay attention. He loves to be a provocateur. That's obvious, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the whole point of Watchmen was the superhero as a construct is the foot soldier of fascism. That's the whole point of that comic. And then it is weird when people are like, I love Watchmen. It's such a cool superhero story. And you
Right.
go,
Yeah.
I mean, it is, but also...
Yeah. It is like it's the deconstruction textbook, right?
Yeah,
Like
I mean, Dr. Manhattan, Dr. Manhattan is not cool. He is the truly indifferent God. And all the rest, and that should be scary, I think.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
like, oh, I love it if he would fight Superman or something like that. Like that, to my mind, is not the place it's supposed to go. So,
Yeah.
That is all to say that I think sometimes superhero comics essentially make use of current events, but then divorce it from the truths of the real world in a way that allows you to enjoy the worst of what they're writing about without having to think about what the worst means. So for instance, like I grew up on the two musics I grew up loving the most are hip hop and heavy metal. I'm a kid of the 80s. Hip hop was beginning, thrash metal was going.
Sure.
I love that stuff, right? And one of the things though that was weird and troubling was how much Nazi iconography thrash metal people enjoyed. The Iron Cross in particular, like not the swastika, right? Because that was too clearly Nazi stuff.
Yeah. You had to hide it.
But the Iron Cross was on lots of stuff. The German helmet. I'm just thinking about like Slayer made a lot out of that kind of stuff. Like there was a fetishization of a lot of the costuming, right? But divorced from any conversation about like, wait, are you saying you like Nazis? Because of course they'd be like, no, I don't. But over time, you start to say like, it's just an Iron Cross. It doesn't mean anything. And that to me is very similar to like all the Pepe the Frog. Like it's just a racist joke. It doesn't mean I'm racist. It's just a racist meme. It doesn't mean I'm racist. But it is opening a sort of door that allows for that. And of course the great protection is like you can't take a joke.
Sure.
Or it just looks cool or whatever.
Yeah.
And so for me that's a long way to say I started wanting to use the history version of the data pages as a way to just sort of say you can't separate superhero comics from the real world if you're talking about real world things.
Yeah.
But like there was a point where I wanted to even see could we do graphics, but I couldn't figure out how to make it work. And in a way, it was like it wasn't telling story. It was more like just here's a picture of like the kind of binding they used in prisons in Louisiana in 1940. Blah, blah, blah. And it was I personally thought it was super interesting, but it did less work.
Yeah. You can't communicate as much maybe.
Pages.
That's interesting. Well, and I think that's super fascinating. Like you're talking about, you have this history in there so that the events and their connections are not ahistorical, which does feel increasingly important. I mean, whether we're talking comics or just the world, right?
Yes.
Like the lessons of history are increasingly valuable and like increasingly scary to people because they can upend, and obviously like there's so much right now in America specifically about like, well, we can't teach that history because that counters the messaging, we're trying to propagate here. With the ahistorical nature of comics, I think the thing that it connects to too is specifically with X-Men, we talk so much about the mutant metaphor. And there's so much conversation around, is it effective? When is it effective? Etc. When is it too on the nose, right? And trying to equate things and that becomes a problem. I would think one thing that this history does is it actually integrates very nicely into the mutant metaphor, where then, okay, we have a mutant fictional prison, right? The pit is a pretend place. We don't actually need to worry about it. But now we make that mutant metaphor connection to the way American prisons actually work for profit, right? Or like, like I've watched the documentary Ava DuVernay's 13th, right? If you watch that, you can just instantly see, okay, there's this connective tissue. It's really effective. It's really effective. And like I said, there's elements in here, like the Congress for Cultural Freedoms, Nanny of the Maroons. There's things that it's like history that I can now turn and go learn about that I didn't know about. And I love that. I love that stuff in media. Like that's always.
I agree.
Eat it right up.
I mean, I don't think it's a mistake. Watchmen and the Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Oh yeah.
All that stuff. Like if they hadn't, like, it was such a smart move for them to make that the sort of organizing principle of the show, because like in a way it, number one, like you say, like it almost elevated or like made more concrete and real all the superhero stuff that was then going on, right? Because you saw the ways these things were related, and then also, it turned what was still going to be a wonderful show into an actual conversation in the zeitgeist, right?
Yeah, right.
Like I can't think, how many pieces were there? Like, did you know about the Tulsa bombing? Did you know about the Tulsa bombing? And then if you were talking to not all black people, but many black people say, I did know about the Tulsa bombing. Yes. And then you say, but then there were white people, Latinos, Asian, whatever. They didn't know about that. And then the fun thing to me is not to say like, and that's the end of it, is instead to say like I enjoyed The Terror season 2 in part because it was about the Japanese internment camps. And as much as it was a supernatural stories, ghosts and all this stuff, the bigger thing was just, look what was done to American citizens.
Yeah.
In World War II. Who had done nothing except be born Japanese American. And that gets to be the thing that you also know happened. So I'm a big fan of that as a trend in popular culture specifically.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think there's been, it's everywhere, but in the comic space, George Takei has a graphic novel that's about the internment camps, and it is one of those things where it just puts a personal lens on like, this stuff happened, Matt. Like, and it's like look at it and feel what that means. So Sabretooth #1 was sort of throwing down the gauntlet on prison, I think, in thematically, right? But then it's also like, I don't want to undersell, like it's really fun, like escape adventure comic. Yeah, right. Like there's a lot of fantasy, like, and there's moments too where you're just having a ball with like X-Men stuff, like Sabretooth leading the Starjammers, right? Like,
I really loved that.
Yeah, like that's just super fun. That was a blast to see. So we got, that was kind of the gauntlet on prison, but now we're out, right? Sabretooth busts out, the Exiles get out, they're on a mission hunting for him. Sabretooth gets immediately apprehended by Orcus.
I had to close it up quick.
It was funny, yeah. So Sabretooth and the Exiles #1, the first issue to me, it felt like it was setting the stage for, obviously we're dealing with Orcus now, and we're dealing with their crimes in frankly more vivid, horrific detail than we've seen. I think. It felt like we're exploring kind of, and especially with the story of the history of gynecology, going back to the history and kind of the abuses there, on abuses on the marginalized. Is that the thematic center of where Exiles is going, or is it just one facet? Is it bigger than that?
That's certainly one big part of, I would say, is sort of like the dirt that is done in the shadows kind of thing to the people who are, again, like, so at the beginning of the first issue, Mole says in his summary, like, what happens to the people who are left out of the dream? They get the nightmare. And I wanted to tie it even more specifically. You'll see through issue by issue, we are also getting into like medical racism and medical apartheid, like the idea of like what abuse. So to differentiate it from the prison sort of metaphor of the first one, I didn't want it to just be like, now here's where private prisons are just the same as, are just as bad as the other one, right? It was more to say like the private prisons, you'll see at the end of Sabretooth, the first mini, we listed that there were 5 Orcus prisons. 1 was lost, and then there's 5 left. So I can promise, like, one is already destroyed at the end of one, I think, right? They're entering the first one was destroyed.
He was on that floating island, and it all
yes,
blows up.
I apologize.
It
I'm
blows
just
up.
putting all the things together. So we'll be kind of moving through, like, we're kind of hopping through Orcus's private prison.
Okay.
A universe, but it's a chance to talk about, like you say, like the things that are done in particular to the kind of mutants who don't get looked at, and certainly the kind of people who don't get looked at, who aren't shown concern, and then in this sphere talking maybe more particularly about, like, for lack of better terms, I'm just going to say care or health, right? Like, what are the ways those are different sets of abuses that exist?
Oh, okay.
In the so that's one set of it. But the other larger sort of thing is, like, if no one is looking out for those mutants who are more easily cast aside, like if the Marauders the Marauders can't save everyone, right? They can't be everywhere. But if a nation of godlike mutants aren't saving everyone, then it's possible you leave room for the devil to come take your place. I guess that's the way I would put it.
That's super interesting, yeah. And it is, I think it's super fascinating to explore in this era, because there's kind of been, like, a vibe that, like, well, they made Krakoa available, so you should be on Krakoa, right? If you're potentially in danger, why aren't you on Krakoa? And, like, there's almost like a judgment that you can feel coming from Krakoa in terms of, like, well, we gave you the chance. And I think this has the chance to explore, like, well, it's not that easy for everyone.
That's right.
You can't. Right. And I guess it's the thing where then the mutant metaphor extends to, like, people are like, oh, you live in a state with horrible laws, move. And it's like that's the easiest thing in the world. Yeah, right. And it becomes that thing, which just does not work. Okay, I could talk to you about this for like 3 hours, but my wife will kill me because we got to go see Black Panther today. And
got to do it. I hope you enjoy it. I haven't seen it yet. My kids want to see it for sure. I'll see if we can see it this weekend. Yeah,
no, I'm excited too. It should be an interesting one. It's like a small miracle if it's good, and I hope that it is. I've got high hopes. All right, I did want to touch though before I let you go. Not too long ago, you announced a Devil in Silver adaptation in the works at AMC, which is super exciting. I love this novel. People should check it out if you haven't. I guess the question is, how's that going? And kind of how'd you get connected with Chris Cantwell, who's another name comics folks will know from a really good Iron Man run.
Yeah.
And but also *Halt and Catch Fire*, which is like one of the coolest shows of the last several years. How'd that all get set up?
And he's got a new Star Trek comic.
Oh, heck yeah. All right, cool.
Yeah. So you should check it out.
Yeah. So how's Devil in Silver progressing? How's it moving?
It's great, actually. Like part of the reason I asked if we could speak in the morning, in about an hour we go back into the room. We're doing a virtual room. We're on today's day 17 of the writer's room. And we'll go into the new year. It's it'll be a 6-episode like mini kind of series. So 6 episodes and it's done. We tell the whole story in that time. Mm-hmm. It's a version of the book, but it's the fun of it is, like I wrote the book. The book is the book. I love the book very much. And then the show doesn't have to just be another version of the book.
Sure.
And it can't be. The fun of the book is we get to do lots of other stuff, still within the confines of the same general story, right? A person improperly thrown into an institution and discovering that there's something malevolent there, and then what does he do with the patients and staff, and how do they all sort of fight against this malevolent force? Mm-hmm. The fun of doing it as a show, you get to more malevolence. There's more room for that kind of thing. So I think it'll be very thoughtful, but also fun. And my hope is we'll be shooting it next summer. Like we'll do the writer's room up until toward the end of January, I think. Then maybe if things go well, you never know until it's on. Start pre-production and then maybe be actually shooting this late spring or early summer. And if that was the case, I'd be an incredibly happy man.
Cool. No, fingers crossed on that one. So you mentioned it's kind of like an anthology approach. I've seen it discussed as. Does that mean different character focuses? Does it mean we're going to other hospitals? Like, how do you kind of see that bouncing?
No, so if it were, so this one is the story of a hospital that gets to be also a conversation about the larger healthcare system in the United States.
Yeah.
If it moves forward, because it might not, maybe everybody hates the show, maybe nobody watches the show.
Maybe it's amazing, and the powers that be.
Believe me,
yeah, who knows?
Believe me, that is what I think it'll be.
Yeah.
But you got a false modesty and all the rest. You got
sure.
But if it goes well, like my pitch to them was just essentially like every system has a devil. Okay. So it wouldn't be each year is a different hospital. It would essentially be each year might be a different system.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Different
devil.
In
that way,
yeah.
Exactly. And and the that way you don't feel like people go like, I saw one. What are you gonna do it now? It's a hospital in Kansas, okay, but it's still like
how
you can't repeat
that.
Yeah. But I think if that idea sort of connects with people and all the rest, and we do a good job with this first season, my feeling is like there's so many. I mean, just look honestly, you could do a whole devil in Twitter 6-episode season of just Musk coming in, like what was before, and then here comes Musk, and the absolute collapse that seems to be underway.
Yeah.
And what would it be like to be in there, to be like a programmer in there? You were there before it started. Whatever problems were already there, now here comes this thing that just decides to just kick everything over.
I do not envy the little guys, the day-to-day folks trying to make it work.
And that's, I mean, I think in a way, like if the anthology series moves forward, in a way that would be the heart of it, would be like the horror of being the little guy in a system that is killing you.
Yeah.
Right? And that there's so many systems we have that I feel like we could get at least 5-6 seasons out of that.
That's super cool. Well, high hopes. I hope it works out for you.
It.
Yeah, no, I'm eager to see it. And then the final thing I want to give you a chance to promote is you got Lone Women coming out in March.
Yeah, that's
it's your
true.
new book.
In March.
So we got Devils in Sabretooth in the Pit. We got Devils in Silver in all systems. Is there a devil in Lone Women? We got a third trilogy.
I wouldn't say a devil, but there's something in it. So the story is about women homesteaders in 1915 Montana, and in particular, it's about a black woman homesteader from California who flees to Montana to escape something terrible in her past, as the saying goes. She gets there. There are a few other lone women, and there's something else out there too.
Sure.
So that's the way I would
check out the trailer on Victor's Twitter or wherever else you can find it, because there's a big hint about what that something might be.
Yes.
All right, very cool. Victor, this is a pleasure as always. It was a blast talking to you. I'm really enjoying the work. I'm looking forward to what comes next. Anything else that you want to... Oh, we didn't mention... didn't mention Eve. Children of the Moon is out right now.
That's true.
It is the sequel to Eve, the first... Mm-hmm. So there's a 5-issue mini that came out from Boom, and Children of the Moon is out now. It's a really fun series. It's a bit different than I think a lot of the work you've done. It's a little sort of younger... it's a younger cast, and it's very much focused on sort of a post-apocalyptic, post-climate change, essentially, version of the world. And it's interesting, and... on one hand, it's depressing because it's reflecting reality. On the other hand, it is very optimistic, I think. And hopeful.
I mean, I certainly, as per this last election as well, I have no hope in the older generations, but I have a great deal of hope in the younger generations.
Yeah.
And Gen Z, I love you dearly for what you did this time. So it was like a love letter to the, also because we have 2 kids, 9 and 11, and I see in them all this hope and possibility. It's a cliche almost to say, but like if anybody's going to save the world, it's not going to be people my age. It's going to be them. Yeah. And so I wanted to write a story that was about like how amazing they are, in the face of all the enormous dumpster of garbage we've left for them. You know?
Yeah.
And they're amazing. And I think, so that's the heart of that comic, is really that, is to sort of honor and sort of applaud that spirit.
Yeah, very cool. No, it's a good one. People should check it out. Okay, anything else that you want to get a chance to mention that we didn't touch?
That's a lot. I appreciate it. That's a lot.
Okay, cool. Final note. We had a listener in the Comic Book Herald YouTube live stream last night who, honestly, it's not really even a question so much as just like putting you on notice of a prediction that they think your third mini is going to be called Sabretooth and the Expats. That it's gonna be a play on expats with the big X, which I thought was pretty clever. I enjoyed that.
Yes, I love that. We will see. We will see.
Perfect. Well, Victor, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining, and
Dave,
we'll
always
talk
a
to you
pleasure.
again. Yeah.
All right. I'll see you.